If there is one single attribute that determines the health of a relationship, I would argue that that attribute is our willingness to take accountability for our contribution towards the situation in which we find ourselves with our partner. And the reason I say it's about accountability is because the moment you don't take accountability for the impact that you have or for the contribution you made that created a problem in the first place, automatically it feels as if the other person is diminished. Now, why is this important? The reason it's important is not just because of the obvious about the fact that it affects the quality of your relationships, but it's important because if you give up that accountability, no matter what your reasons are, whether it's innocent or whether it's something that is manipulative because you're afraid of something or it's fear-driven, whatever it is, the moment you give up your accountability for your contribution, your behavior, your emotions, how you feel about things and how you feel in response to the way people interact with you or how they come at you, the moment you give up that accountability, you give up your agency as well. And your agency is your choice to determine how you want to deal with things and how you feel about things. Now, the reason why this is such an important point is because the mainstream approach to mental health encourages, and I will go as far as saying it actually actively encourages, abdication of accountability. And the reason I say it encourages abdication is because it constantly gives you reasons about why it is that the way you feel is not your fault. If it's not generational trauma, the latest thing I saw is ancestral trauma, ancestral wisdom, and all of these things that's supposed to pass down in your genes and your DNA and all of these things. You know, I'll come back to the actual science that challenges all of these mainstream perspectives about what drives our emotions, right? Because there's one simple little example I always give my clients when I speak to them about this habits that we need to form and exercises and tools that they look for when they go to see people to assist them with things they're having difficulty with or what they want to improve in their lives. And that is that, you know, when it comes to milkshake, right, and this is the example I use, is that if you try milkshake for the first time, chances are you're going to go for one of the safe flavors and the most popular flavors, which is, well, not popular, I wouldn't say popular, but the flavors that are most likely to be tried the first time around is going to be vanilla or strawberry, for argument's sake. So now you try, let's say it's vanilla. And because it's the first time that you're experiencing that sensation, the texture, the taste, the temperature, the way it hits those notes, how comforting it is, all of those things. The moment you try it and it gives you that certain sensation, that's what you enjoy. And from that moment on, every single time someone offers you milkshake, the one thing you're going to go for is, I want vanilla. And you go for vanilla milkshake. And every single time someone comes along again and they try to encourage you to try a different flavor, nope, vanilla does it for me, so I'm going to go with vanilla. And that's your preference then. That becomes your preference in that moment relative to everything you've experienced about milkshake to that point. Then eventually you get tired of someone nagging you all the time, like, why don't you just try chocolate milkshake? And you keep resisting, but one day you get maybe to a restaurant and you find that they don't have vanilla milkshake, so you say, well, let's just try chocolate. Let's see what's so fantastic about this. And then you try chocolate milkshake. And when you take that first sip of chocolate milkshake, and it hits a completely different note for you, it connects with you in a different way, it gives you sensory experiences that you didn't experience with the vanilla. And suddenly, in that very moment, chocolate becomes your new favorite. Now, my question to you is this. Did you have to drink chocolate milkshake repeatedly for 21 days or for 60 days or whatever these elapsed periods of time or 10,000 hours and all of this nonsense that they keep talking about? Did you have to do that repeatedly before you were convinced that chocolate milkshake was better than vanilla milkshake for you? Or did you just experience the value of that sensory experience and immediately you connected with it and you said, this is my new favorite? So from that point on, whenever you ordered milkshake, you ordered chocolate milkshake. That is what I mean when I say that science falls flat on its face when it tries to tell us why it is that we feel the way we do about things. And it might seem like a stretch, but watch how it connects. There's something called the science of the smile. And if you haven't come across this before, it's quite a very simplistic but fascinating insight into how we operate as humans. And what it says in a nutshell is that regardless of your state of mind, you can be angry, you can be sad, you can be depressed, you can be anxious, doesn't matter. If you physically form the gesture of a smile on your face, you will release feel-good hormones into your brain. Now that's critically important for a number of reasons. One, your decision to smile had absolutely nothing to do with your chemical balance. It was a decision, it was conscious will, because you didn't have anything that gave you reason to want to smile. But just because you consciously chose to, or someone told you smile, the physical response to that is that your body then does release or trigger the hormones that make you feel better. So it elevates your mood. So that's one thing. And what it confirms is that it's not your brain that told you to smile, it's you that decided to smile, and then that fed something into your brain. So the chemical balance theory is already shaky when it comes to that. The next thing is neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the science, I say science is a loaded term. It's the behavior of your brain in response to new stimuli or new experiences or new information. So the moment you experience something new, automatically your brain adapts its pathways, its neural pathways to reflect that new information, to reflect that new experience and everything that you learned from it, the wisdom that you gained from it, the lessons that you learned, the insights that you gained, the knowledge that you acquired, all of that. All of that then influences the reshaping of pathways in your brain to absorb that information, to store it and to process it and everything else. And what that confirms again is that your brain doesn't choose how it wants to process information. It is by design reactive to new information. And the moment you start realizing that, you'll start realizing that it's you exposing yourself, conscious will, exposing yourself to new perspectives and new understandings and new information and new experiences that allows you to see things differently. It's not remapping your brain. It's not about training your brain. It's not about learning new habits and all of that. It's about realization. It's about connecting with the value of what is important to you. And why that is critically important is because it blows another critical scientific theory out of the water when it comes to psychology and human emotion. And that is the serotonin debate. And again, you can do independent research for all of this. It's not my claims, but I can tell you firsthand that I've observed it, experienced it, and witnessed in people I know personally and people that I've worked with directly and people that I've observed firsthand. It's not from a textbook, where I can confirm that I've seen that these theories all fall flat. Because serotonin is lowest in people who, well, I wouldn't say lowest, but it's low in people who are content. And the link between serotonin and depression, the earliest reports I could come across was from 1979, where that link was debunked. It had no relationship. And it goes on to reveal all sorts of misunderstandings about this chemical balances and chemical imbalances and how that relates to our emotional disposition. You see, here's the thing. If I look at someone who is currently depressed for a very legitimate reason in their life, something that is important to them just doesn't seem to be working out. And that leads them to a point of depression about that thing, right? And then I come along with fancy diagnostic tools and I analyze what is going on with their brain. I'm going to tell you what the brain looks like when someone is depressed. I'm not going to tell you that if the brain looks like this, then you're going to get depressed, because that has never, ever, ever been proven. Your emotional disposition is about how you feel about something, and your body then reacts to how you feel about it. What you connect with, what is important to you, what you have hope in, what you aspire to, what you look forward to, what you're enthusiastic about, what you're dreading. All of those very legitimate human experiences, emotions, and thought processes that influences the biology of your body. It's not the other way around. Now, coming back to what I said in the beginning about abdicating accountability. So even though you might be well-intentioned and sincere, the moment you say, I can't help how I feel about this, you make me feel this way. If you don't do that, then I'll be okay. You constantly taking your accountability for how you feel about something and how you understand it and what you can do about it, and you're passing it on to someone else. Now, if we want to do that and we think that is acceptable because that's what a supportive partner is supposed to do for you and all of that, then you have to be willing to have the reverse being true as well. Which means that what they also don't want to accept accountability for, they can blame you for it. Well, because you're always like this, that's why I always feel like that, and that's why I can never do this and I can never do that. And how you interact with each other when it comes to that kind of interaction, when it comes to that kind of compromise and understanding and realization of the impact that you have on each other, that determines the quality of the relationship. But that quality of that relationship will be then determined by what each person sees as valuable and what they see as entitled or expectation, legitimate expectation. And that's where we get to the milkshake example again, is that you don't know how someone else experienced chocolate milkshake. You just know what your experience of chocolate milkshake is. So you can tell them this is really amazing, but you're amazing what you subjectively feel about what is amazing about it. You'll never know whether it's their subjective feeling of the same thing, because no matter how much you try to describe something, how it connects with you internally is completely different to how someone else will connect with it. And it's because you find resonance, or you can share that space and you can complement each other in that space. That's what creates a good union or good unity between the two of you. So when it comes to trying to understand why we feel the way we feel, the moment you give up your agency, the moment you try to rationalize it based on what is wrong with your body, what is wrong with your brain, you lose sight of who you are and why you feel that way. And when you lose sight of that, it then becomes a crutch. It becomes debilitating. It becomes something that obstructs you in your efforts to have a good life, to rise above the trials of life or the struggles that you face. And that's when we start making statements like, I suffer from this and I suffer from that emotion. What we're actually saying is that something that we experience is still impacting us because of how we feel about what we experienced, because of what it shook about reality for us, about what impact it had on us, about what it is that we had to give up about our hopes and aspirations about the future because of that event. That's what we still struggle with. We're not struggling with the event that is no longer there. We're struggling with the impact of the event. We're struggling with the impact of the betrayal. And that's why you need to reclaim your agency. If you want to have a healthy relationship, you have to first and foremost take accountability for how you feel. You can explain to the other person why it is that it's important for you to have them treat you a certain way or approach something or show up for you in a certain way. But you can't say that they're making you feel that way. You can only say that this is what's important to you, and if it's important to them, then you have something to work with. If what's important to you is not important to them, you're going to be at loggerheads all the time trying to compromise and keep score about who's compromising more in order for the relationship to have a healthy balance. It's not really that complicated. And I guess the complication is that when we set out believing that our body is doing things to us, our brain is doing things to us, then it becomes next to impossible to solve our problems because we're treating symptoms as root causes. We're treating the effect of something as if it is the cause of something. Can you see how complicated that makes things? It's like, for example, everyone who is happy, regardless of your religious, spiritual, cultural, traditional, ethnic background, everyone who is happy smiles. And even if you have tears of joy, it's still accompanied by a smile while you're tearing. And this is true across the board. You go to the uncontacted tribes in the middle of nowhere, and you go to someone in the middle of the most advanced city in the world, and they will respond emotionally in exactly the same way. So similarly, I would hazard a guess that someone who is in the middle of a first world city is experiencing a certain type of emotional duress. If you go to one of those uncontacted tribes and you find someone there who is experiencing the exact same emotional duress, you'll find that their body will react in exactly the same way. They'll develop exactly the same chronic illnesses. They'll develop exactly the same aches and pains because your body is in response to your emotional disposition. And that's why you always see that even with mainstream medicine, the one precursor to recovering or relief or alleviating or managing symptoms of chronic illness is to manage your stress levels. But you can't manage stress. You can only understand what stresses you out. Again, cause and effect, coping or overcoming. If you understand why you are stressing about something and you identify what is within your grasp to be able to influence and change, and what is outside of your control that you need to mitigate so that you can limit the impact that it has on you. When you take that approach to stress, suddenly you're not just stressed because you have a lot to stress about. You're stressed because you know exactly what it is that you need to get a handle on. And what's important about that is it gives you something tangible to work with. And when it gives you something tangible to work with, it means it gives you hope because you see that there's a solution that is possible. There's a way forward. There is opportunity to do something about it or to get out of that space or to get out of that conundrum that you've been struggling with for so many years. And that brings me to another important point, which is that there is no problem whatsoever except for death itself, the advent of death. Except for that, there is not a single problem that cannot be solved. And if the problem appears unsolvable, it's because you don't understand the problem well enough, not because it doesn't have a solution. And when you start changing your approach to problems and to life and to how you understand yourself and how you relate to how you feel about things and why sometimes you're just reactive and other times you can be composed and deliberate. When you start looking at it from a different perspective, suddenly you see things that you didn't see before. Which brings us to a very fascinating realization. And that is, and this works every single time, is that the moment you see something differently, it's impossible to see it the way you saw it before. So if you have a prejudice or you have a gripe about something today, and you realize that there were some other contributing factors that you weren't aware of, suddenly your understanding changes what you feel about it. And because your understanding changes what you feel about it, it doesn't mean you accept it. It just means that you're not as emotionally charged the way you were before when you encounter it. And that's how relationships work. That's how overcoming past betrayals and things like that work, is that you don't suddenly feel okay about the fact that you were betrayed. But the reason for being betrayed, you see that as something that was not just about who you were or what you meant to the other person. It's about their demons and what they were struggling with and what they were having difficulty dealing with. And that's what happens, is that when we see ourselves as victims, we automatically abdicate accountability and we automatically focus on getting other people to understand and realize how bad we've got it, how heavy it is for us, how they shouldn't expect more from us because they don't know how difficult it is for us. They don't know what we've been through and all of that. That's a survivalist, coping, victim kind of mentality. And as much as there's empathy and compassion required for people in that state, if you choose to remain in that state, you are not being fair to the people around you who constantly have to make space for you because you're in that state. And then who makes space for them? And then you start comparing, well, if you were dealing with what I was dealing with, then you would understand why it's so difficult for me to come out of this space and why it's so difficult for me to be better than this or to have a normal life or to be able to control my emotions or my anxiety or whatever it is. The moment you give up your agency on how you feel about your life, about what happened to you, about why it happened to you, when you stop looking for any of that, you end up with only one thing, and that is judgment. If you don't have understanding, the only thing you have left is judgment. Because when you don't have understanding, you can't formulate your own critical opinion about it. You then have to rely on an external point of reference about what it is that you need to do. how you feel, or whether it's right or wrong, or whether it's good or bad. And that's the problem, is that we've gotten ourselves to a point in the mainstream mental health space where everything is about judgment. Everything has this ideal about this is how it should be. If it isn't that way, then that's right or that's wrong, or that's what you need to do to cope with it. And this is the tools you need to adopt, and this is what treatment you need to get, and all. It's got nothing to do with any of that. When it comes to emotions, it's about why you feel the way that you do. And if you understand why you feel the way that you do, and not at a surface level, not like, oh, well, they betrayed me, that's why I feel upset. Why does their betrayal upset you? Why is it that the betrayal of one person will upset you and the betrayal of a totally different person will have no effect on you? You expected something different. If you expected trust and you expected loyalty from one person because of how much value you placed on their presence in your life, them betraying you is going to be very different to someone who means nothing to you, who has no significant role to play in your life. They're just someone that's an acquaintance or an accomplice in what you have to achieve professionally or practically or whatever it is. But if they betray you, you might get annoyed about the fact that they betrayed your trust in them. But beyond that, they're not pivotal to your well-being, to your quality of life. So you can replace them. It's the people we can't replace, the people we don't want to replace. When they betray us, or when they let us down or disappoint us or abandon us, that's when we assume that it was about something that they thought of us. And that's how we get into the victim headspace, and we start mulling over things and we start stewing in it to a point where we then convince ourselves that this is larger than me. I can't recover from this. You don't know what it is. You don't know how I feel. You don't know how it's affected me. You don't know how difficult life is. And the more things like this happen at an early age, the less likely you are to be aware, consciously aware of why it is that it has an impact on you later on in life. But the fact that it has an impact on you because of a very good reason that you might just not realize anymore doesn't mean that it doesn't have impact on you, or that it now suddenly requires some external physical intervention or invasive intervention or medical intervention for you to be able to feel okay again. It just means that you need to reverse engineer the process. And that reverse engineering of the process is that if you feel emotionally overwhelmed or charged, or I hate the word, but I'll use it, if you feel triggered by something, you looking to understand why that triggers you. Doesn't have to go back to what the original reason was for you feeling triggered by things like that. It's about reclaiming your agency. It's about being present in that moment, seeing it for what it is, and then understanding whether or not your reaction to it is rational. And if it isn't rational, you then start processing it more mindfully so that you can reshape your expectation and your understanding and what you believe you are capable of doing when you encounter that kind of a situation. And that's how you can break away from what feels like you're normal, what feels like it's always been that way, so this is just who I am. Because the moment you do that, you're literally giving yourself permission not to change anything about your life, not to change anything about how you feel about things, and you expect everyone else to then bend and shape around that. But more often than not, when you're doing that, you're not looking how it is that you might need to bend and shape around someone else's duress, someone else's stress, someone else's needs or preferences. Because you're in a victim headspace. And when you're in a victim headspace, everything is about you. It's not about anyone else. And then you start comparing who's got it worse. And that's just further down that slippery slope. And the only way to get off it is to claim your agency, to claim accountability, to actively practice accountability for how you feel the way you do and why you feel the way you do, so that it doesn't control you, so that you actually determine how you choose to respond to things. And this then opens up a whole new perspective on how it is that you can go about navigating life. Because that's the one thing we all struggle with the most, is how do we make sense of life? And if we weren't exposed to healthy relationships or healthy frameworks or healthy environments where we saw life playing out in a way that was wholesome and grounded and nurturing in a good way, then we go through life struggling to try and establish it for ourselves, because that's our human need. Our core need is to be significant, to be of consequence, to know that we matter. And that's what life is about. It's about finding spaces in which we can have impact that we are happy to have on others. the impact that we want to have. We want to see that we are beneficial, that we add value, that people value us, that they value what we contribute, that we are appreciated. That's what we're looking for. So when we don't have that, or we believe that it's impossible to have it because people won't get us, then we start behaving badly. And when I say behaving badly, I mean we start getting selfish, we start getting obstructive, abrasive, uncooperative, and all of those sorts of things. So going back to what we started with, which is the science of mental health. Science doesn't explain emotion. Science explains biology. And science itself is only as accurate as the person who is doing the observation and the analysis. And if their point of departure is distorted or biased, what they arrive at a conclusion with is going to be misleading, because they're looking to prove a certain position that they have on something. They're not looking to interpret it in a broader perspective. So forget about chemical imbalance theories and forget about mental illness and all of those things. Start understanding that if you feel like your emotions are out of your control, you need to understand why it is that you are so emotionally charged about something that sends you off in that direction, that you feel as if the only thing you can do is protect yourself from what you think is going to happen next. That's where anxiety comes from. And there's no mental illness or mental condition or emotional disposition where your assumptions are not at play. It's your assumption about what is or isn't going to happen that you can or can't cope with or deal with or overcome. It's your assumptions about it that determines whether you go in the direction of confidence and you deal with it, or you go in the direction of anxiety and fear and then you in reaction mode. We need to simplify and reclaim the human within the human experience, because we've overcomplicated it with what we think is science, even though science itself contradicts the theories about mental health and mental illness. And like I said, please do your own research. Don't take my word for it. Go and look at the science of the smile. Go and look at neuroplasticity. There's another piece of interesting science that I came across. And that is where they've proven that there is absolutely no evidence to indicate the origin of a thought in your brain. More than that, they also can't identify why it is that there is a decision point that is made between the stimulus to act and the action actually taking place, where we intervene in our stimulus to action kind of process, or whatever that is that they talk about in the neuroscience space. There's an intervention point between that where we might have the urge to want to do something, but then we catch ourselves, we restrain ourselves. That's not chemical balances that's at play. That's your conscious will. And just because science can't prove conscious will yet, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Because remember, at some point, science also didn't believe that it was possible to communicate with someone without a physical medium between you and them. So if you're going to trust science blindly, you need to understand that the science you are trusting is limited by those who are observing and analyzing, and also it's limited by what it is that we think we need to be looking at as a solution to a problem that we're facing. And that's the thing. If you don't understand the problem well enough, you look in the wrong place. And when you look in the wrong place and you're convinced that that is the contributing factor, it will lead you down a rabbit hole that will get you to believe what the doctors were telling us in the early 70s, that smoking was good for you. Don't trust science blindly. Science is only as good as the researcher or the scientist. And if they don't understand the human condition while they're trying to explain it through science, you're looking for trouble. You're looking for a lot of trouble. So those three things: science of a smile, neuroplasticity, chemical imbalance theory, the serotonin link to depression, all of that. Do deeper research. Don't look at what the mainstream is saying that we believe or there's reason to believe and all of that. That means that they don't know. Look at whether there is actual evidence to confirm 100% that that is true, and you'll find it isn't. It's not me being a conspiracy theorist or anything. I'm too practical to want to be a conspiracy theorist. There has to be plausibility and there has to be causality. And the causality, when it comes to how our brain operates relative to our emotional disposition, there is absolutely no causality. Because there is no consistent indicator that says that when I see this, regardless of how you feel now, it means that in the next moment you're going to change your mood. There's nothing like that. But there's tons of evidence to confirm that when I feel a certain way, my body reacts to that feeling. When I feel stressed, I get stiff neck or headaches or spasms or tight shoulders. When I'm struggling about something that has been weighing me down for a long time, I develop diabetes, or I develop a liver problem, or I develop a gut problem, or I overthink things and I end up developing hyperacidity and things like that. Your body is always reacting to your emotional duress. It is never the other way around. Ever. So I hope you will take time to reflect on that and reconsider what it is that you believe to be true, so that you can start realizing that, if anything, the most important takeaway from all of this is that your body is a signaling system for what's happening with your emotions. Because when you lose sight, we lose mindfulness, we get distracted, we get taken into a certain way of doing things, or a certain experience that we're having, or a certain pressure that we're under. When we get swept into that, we become distracted, but our body feels that duress. And then when your body can't handle that duress anymore, it reaches a saturation point. That's the point at which you feel the ailment developing, the headache, the sinus, the nausea, the whatever it is that you feel, the aches and pains and spasms and migraines and all of those sorts of things. It's because your body reached a saturation point of being able to deal with that kind of duress, and that's when it then appears to need physical intervention. That's where we lose the plot, is that physical intervention to alleviate the physical symptom then convinces us that that's the problem that we need to solve, rather than why did we get into that state in the first place. And that answers a lot more questions than the theory of chemical imbalances and all of that nonsense. So hopefully that was of value to you. I hope you reconsider what it is that you take from and what you believe to be true about what is out there pervasively in the mainstream space, because, like I've said before, and I'll say this a million times over, if the mainstream understanding was developing a healthier and more informed perspective of what makes us human and what the human experience is about, we would have an improving mental health trend in the world. We wouldn't have a consistently degrading one. So check what it is that you've accepted to be true. Because if you've been trying to apply a solution to a problem and the problem continues to prevail, it means that's not the solution. It means that's either a coping mechanism or it's just complicating things. It's not a solution. So I'm hoping and I'm praying that anyone watching this will choose not to want to cope with life, but to want to thrive in life. And the only way you thrive is when you have understanding, healthy understanding that makes sense, that answers questions, that resolves problems, not things that shifts blame for problems. I'm Zaid Ismail. I suspect a lot of people will be unhappy with me about what I've presented in today's episode, but I believe it needs to be said, and we need to have more healthy, vibrant, spirited discussions about this, because we're really not doing ourselves any favors. And as we can see, the world is becoming a more brutal place, a more uncaring, a more harsh space. It's not becoming the kind of space that everyone is yearning for, which is peaceful, harmonious, understanding, compassionate, and wholesome. Take care.